very proud to see so many people here. This is part of the public process. It's a very good thing. So our community has come out to this process publicly from February 2015 until today, 15 outreach events in total. This is actually the 16th. So this process not only requires the opportunity for public input, but seeks it. It is what reinforces our democratic system. So I thank you all for your attendance. Oh, I forgot to do this.
We need to get that on screen.
Mike, if you could please drop down the projector screen and turn on the projector.
There we go. We're good.
I don't think they want it.
Yeah, I don't think they want it behind the board.
Okay. Okay, it's on the TV.
So, Mike, is
So
it on
I'm
the
sorry,
air?
you're gonna have to look up there.
It's on the air. Okay, that's good.
In 2014, the Board of Trustees formed an initiative to find ways to revitalize the area around the Tarrytown Station. It was led by a steering committee made up of residents, planning board members, volunteers, and consultants. The work of the committee, which has retained the majority of its volunteer members since its inception, has been documented by a report at the end of each phase, all of which were available to the public. The initial effort from 2014 resulted in the Tarrytown Station Area Strategic Plan, followed shortly after in 2015 by TED's Tarrytown Economic Development Strategy. As the study narrowed its focus and developed more concrete understanding of what was involved, a focused outline evolved and was documented in Tarrytown Connected, a framework plan for the station area, October of 2016. There were 4 symposia open and noticed to the public during the comp plan process and were thematically specific. One worth mentioning from June of 2017 specifically discussed viewshed, affordable housing, and mobility. This report followed and was available to the public as well, which brought us to the rewriting of our new comprehensive plan, dated September of 2018 and was formally adopted in November of 2018. In the 5 long years since the initiative was formed, the project evolved from researching what Tarrytown would like to happen at the train station to developing the tools and guide the changes we'd like to see in that whole area. The most important of these tools was the new village-wide comprehensive plan. As I mentioned, during the research and development of this comp plan, the committee hosted over 15 outreach events available to the public, open sessions as well as smaller workshops at the library, the senior center, at coffee shops, at Village Hall, and informally all over the village. The committee spoke with seniors and students, merchants and residents, business owners and stakeholders to find out the issues and topics that were most important to our neighbors. Land use consultants, advisors in the committee met monthly and often more often to distill and compile the information and transform it into a strategy for planning. In October of 2016, the final document of this phase, Tarrytown Connected, a framework for the station area, was distributed and published online. It was a direct translation of the information, comments, interviews, and outreach discussions that were compiled over the previous 2 years. But Tarrytown Connected needed to become more than a framework. We needed to update our comp plan and adopt new zoning to implement that plan. And this started with the establishment of 2 working groups, one for the comp plan and one for the zoning. So the comp plan, by law and by common sense, is our community's expression of what we aspire for our village. The new comp plan is organized in thematic sections that include mobility, the built environment, community, the environment, and sustainability, concepts and issues most discussed at those public outreach events. Once the comp plan was in place, the new proposed zoning developed, based and formatted in direct relation to the guiding themes the comp plan incorporated. Again, it is from this comp plan that the proposed zoning was developed. The comp plan and zoning did not happen simultaneously because the zoning breathes from the comp plan. Like the thematic sections in the comp plan, the proposed zoning is similarly structured: land use, mobility, transportation, parking, housing, community character, infrastructure, open space, and sustainability. George Jane will explain the mechanics and the details of the zoning in a moment. But I quote from Tarrytown Connected, a framework for the station area. The station area and waterfront should be a people place with the right mix of uses. It should create pedestrian activity and support the village tax base without overwhelming the area with traffic. It should be visually and physically connected to the downtown. Infrastructure and new development should be green and resilient, and any new development should be inclusive, not exclusive, accessible to everyone. So the comp plan and the draft zoning we're hearing today tries to do this. In the end, our committee and the elected Board of Trustees try to achieve a balance of opportunity and benefit for the entire village, taking into account what we learned from our residents and what they felt was most important. So I would ask that you think about this as you take your turn at the mic, that not only do you speak about your personal concerns, but you contribute to the discussion by offering solutions that are beneficial to the whole community, our entire village. So thank you for this. And I'll turn over the presentation to George Janes, who has worked tirelessly and at very little compensation for this extended period of time. He has worked way beyond his contract, so that's all I'm going to say. George Janes.
Thanks, Joan. Okay, so I'm the planner here, and I'm here to explain how the zoning works, and so that we can hear your comments based upon how it actually functions. First of all, this is your zoning map on the screen, and in red we've outlined the station area overlay, which would sit on top of your zoning. So it's only in that, what we're talking about will only affect that portion in the northwest part of the village. And it's an overlay, a zoning overlay, which means it sits on top of the existing zoning. The underlying zoning districts will not change. This sits on top, and it's an optional program, which we will get into in a second. So the area that we zoom in here a little bit so you can actually see what we're looking at includes Village Hall, the Metro North Station, the boat clubs, parking lots, Hudson Harbor, includes the waterside parks and other parks upland, and then other commercial, industrial, and residential uses. It's a real mix. And the proposed SAO is not traditional zoning. You have traditional Euclidean zoning, you have a more new-ish form-based zoning. This is neither of those. Number one, it's optional. You could always develop, you could ignore it and develop it as of right under the current underlying zoning. It's also in and of itself not as of right. It has to go through this process, and at the end of the process, or actually several steps along the way, you could get a no. It does not require a predetermined building form. So unlike form-based codes where you actually predefine what form the building should be, that's not what this is. It does not require the separation of uses that traditionally you have in zoning, where commercial uses are over there and industrial uses are over here and residential uses are over here and schools are over there. It doesn't do that. It does not use typical zoning measures because it's not typical zoning like lot coverage or units per acre, yards, floor area ratio, other things. Instead, what it does is development proposals are scored according to how they perform against a set of predetermined criteria. And proposals that fail cannot move forward. So what are the criteria? They actually match pretty well with your comp plan. There are 8 criteria: land use, mobility and access, transportation and parking, affordable and senior housing, neighborhood character, infrastructure, open space, sustainability, and resiliency. So what I'm going to actually do is get out of this and try to actually do something live, which you should never do, but I'm going to try. All right, thanks. Okay, so the scorecard is implemented in a simple Excel spreadsheet. You have a summary tab up in front. You have tabs for each of the criteria below that we just went through. And each of the criteria have components. So I'm on the first tab, mix of use, or I'm sorry, land use. And one of the components is a mix of use. And so it would get a 0 if the development does not significantly advance the goals of the station area. 1, development advances the goals of the station area but does not mix uses. 2, the development advances the goals of the station area and provides a mix of uses. And then 3, significant mix of uses and complementing the existing uses in the downtown area. And so you go through, there's a whole bunch of these. You go through this. I'm not going to go through all of them right now. The scorecard is available online, and you can look at them and read them yourself. And you can actually even game through different scenarios. How would it perform? How would different, we actually did this where we scored hypothetical scenarios to see how they would perform. I'm on the housing tab right now where it deals with permanently affordable housing and levels of it and levels of affordability, the locations of the units, either on-site or off-site. And then we have this tab called character, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this because I understand that this is of concern for folks. So neighborhood character is a tab where there's a number of different elements where you have things like ground floor uses. Ground floor uses for urban design and walkability purposes, you want to have active uses that are transparent, meaning that you can actually see in, like shop windows, as opposed to blank brick walls. And that you want active uses that that would allow for a more pedestrian-oriented area, rather than blank walls, right? And so you have a number of things like this. One of the things that we do have is impacts on public scenic view sheds, because this is something that folks asked about. And I'm going to jump back here to talk about that for a second. Okay, so one of the component of neighborhood character is impact on public view sheds. Residents residents went out and selected these viewpoints, these 5 viewpoints that are actually written into your zoning code. Because what happened during the comp plan process was that certain viewpoints are important. They're public viewpoints. You want to have a view to the water. You don't want to have development that's going to break those viewpoints. And so we didn't know where those viewpoints were. The residents went out and they picked these 5 viewpoints to write into the zoning code. So whenever you do a development, you have to actually show what your development is going to do from these 5 viewpoints, and then it gets assessed to see whether these impacts are going to be significant or not. The idea originally proposed, and not before you now, but originally proposed, it was with no explicit height limit. But now, currently, there is a height limit of 5 stories west of the track and 10 stories east of the track. That was added later, because there's concern about height and views. But the whole idea of performance-based zoning is that you've got to show what it does, and then you've got to evaluate whether it actually meets the criteria of the village. So, for instance, if you put a 3-story building in the wrong place, that's a bad thing. And you want to have the ability to say, that 3-story building has a negative impact on this view shed, we don't want to allow it. A 5-story building somewhere else may be better for a view shed. And that kind of flexibility is built into this zoning. Okay, and then I'm going to switch back for just 1 second. We have the 8 criteria, and then we also have this bonus tab. Again, a bonus tab was something that was a relatively late addition, and I will talk about that for a second. So zoning can't discriminate against tax-exempt uses. You can't say, well, we don't want churches or schools. You can't do that. So the scorecard was originally designed with no bonus points or explicit economic considerations. But bonus points were added so that projects that financially contribute to the village priorities can earn extra points. And that's the way it's designed right now with this fairly significant bonus point category. Bonus points can't save a bad project, right? You can't buy your way in with a whole bunch of bonus points, but it can help marginal projects pass. Okay, and then I'm going to, that's all the detail I'm going to get into in terms of the scorecard right now, unless you want to hear more. I'm going to talk just briefly about the process, because I think the process is very important. So if you're a developer and you want to use this, you come in and you have a pre-application conference with the village. And then you, if that goes well, you submit an application package, which has a preliminary review by the Board of Trustees. And if the Board of Trustees likes the concept, it can go forward. If they don't like the concept, they can just say no, and it goes away. If they like the concept, it goes forward, and then it goes to the planning board. And then the planning board gets more detail about the project. It gets a master development plan, which has all of these submission requirements, which are written into the zoning. And then it uses all of these submissions to score it. They use the scorecard we have to score it, to see whether it passes or not. If the project achieves, right now, it's an 85 out of 100 with the option of getting 25 bonus points. It passes. If it gets less than 85, it fails. And so if it fails, it does not go forward. It jumps out of the system. If it passes, it then needs to go through the seeker process. So this rezoning process isn't like what some communities do to create shovel-ready sites or anything like that. That's not what this is, because they still have to do an environmental review after they've gone through this part of the process. They got to do a DEIS. Okay, and so then you come out of the seeker process. At the end, the planning board issues recommendations to the Board of Trustees on whether to grant the SAO designation. And so that goes to the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees can elect not to take the planning board's recommendation. Or not. If it continues to go forward, it can continue to go forward. And then there's a hearing process. And then you have another option at the end of the hearing process to say no to the project. So there are four times along the way where a project that comes in can fail and come out of the system. One of the things that was said during this, which I think was really an interesting point, is that one of the participants said, you know, if nothing happens down here, that would be okay. And so what this system does, with 4 points of failure along the way, it says, you know, it's got to be a really good project that's really good for the village. Otherwise, we're just going to fail it out. And it either can be failed out by the planning board, or it can be failed out by the Board of Trustees. It can be failed out at the beginning of the process. It can be failed out at the end of the process. So there's a lot of safeguards along the way. And that's what you get when you don't have an as-of-right system, when you have something that's optional, that's something that you can just say no to. Because you're not changing the underlying zoning, so they can still do development under the underlying zoning. It's just that if they want to do something extra, do something special that meets these criteria, that essentially help implement the goals of the comprehensive plan, because they all come from the comprehensive plan, well, then they can go forward. So you have a lot of conditions based upon these approvals. If it gets approved at the end of the line. That's all I have. Yep.
I need to say one more thing. I've just been asked to say there is no proposal on the table now that is being considered under this zoning. Zero, nothing, nada.
What Joan mentioned. There have been some comments circulating that the village wants to tear down the, yeah, if everybody can hear me. There have been some comments that the village wants to tear down or see sold the affordable housing at Asbury Terrace and Franklin Courts and Towers. There is no such proposal. As far as I'm aware, those buildings are not for sale to any private interests. That is not the village's plan, nor could it be the plan to tear down those affordable housing units. So that's not on the table, never has been. As far as I'm aware, it never will be. But that's one comment. There was another comment that village-owned land on the waterfront, there was a proposal before the planning board that is on record on the video of the planning board of a recent meeting. The village has no agreement with this developer, and we did not solicit this proposal from them. We informed them that any proposal for property that they were under contract for at the Tarrytown Boat Club that sought to include village-owned land was not only premature, but would also require authorization from the Board of the Trustees of the Village of Tarrytown, and they do not have that authorization. So any such proposal made to the planning board was extremely premature. It's not something that, as Joan said, it's not subject to the SAO that's on the table this evening.
I don't know if there's any, I would say, brief questions or comments from any members of the board, but because there's so many people here, if you guys have anything, just try and make it fast, because we have a lot of possible speakers. So.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody for showing up, and with so many people here, we have the opportunity that the board doesn't just do things haphazardly. There's a lot of very important people that work very hard and volunteer their times on various boards: planning board, zoning board, architectural review board, transportation board, affordable housing. I can go on and on. So we don't work in a vacuum, and a lot of people do a lot of important work in this village, just volunteering. And with so many people here tonight, I'd just like to have the opportunity to ask them if anybody else is interested in volunteering to the committee. Please see Josh. Thank you.
We're also asking, if you come up to speak, there's a sign-in sheet at the podium. We're going to need a mic there. No, I know, but it's only going to be on TV. They're not going to be able to hear in the room.
Good, mine.
And the only other thing I want to say is that the changes that we have begun to discuss, which we're waiting for these public hearings to go through, but ones we've been looking at the height maximum, good possibility we would lower that. And secondly, the treatment of the bonus, we've been talking about that the understanding that we thought was going in and that we would probably change it to is that a project which had a failing score in a category cannot buy its way out at all with bonus points. But the idea behind the bonus points is that from the village's perspective as a whole, a project which provided additional tax revenues compared to one that didn't would be a better one. So if all the other factors are kept in place, and which you get a project that fulfills some portion of all those goals, then you would prefer to have one which generates more tax revenues for the village and for everybody else, and it reduces the burden on the village. So that's the thinking behind it. However, the change we're certainly going to consider is to tighten up the requirements in which you could apply those bonus points. You haven't come up with any settled procedure yet, but that's certainly something we've been talking about since this began. But we wanted to take everybody's comments. None of this is written in stone. We're going to do this for as many weeks and meetings as is possible. So going forward with that, we open up the floor. If you have 5 minutes to speak, since there's so many people, and then you can come back later for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Dolph Beal from 104 Main Street, 108 Main Street, sorry. The items that I want to go over are there. I'm trying to get this into what I thought was 3 minutes, so I'll be very brief. When I was here last month, I pointed out that the view from Main Street is going to be cut as shown in the lower left corner. I was wrong. That's with 72 feet. In fact, this proposal, if adopted as submitted, would allow 140 feet to be built. And as a frame of reference, the view of the cupola on top of the Village Hall is 55 feet. So think what the view from Main Street is going to look like you can use 55 feet as a frame of reference and think about what 140 feet is going to look like over that entire red square. The next slide shows how I calculated the 140 feet. The detail on all of these slides on the bottom section is highlighted in yellow. It comes directly from the SAO. These are not my words. These are words that were distributed a month ago. I'd like to point out that that's 4 times the current height. 140 feet is 4 times the currently allowed 35 feet. I don't see any reason for that. And in fact, the comprehensive plan mentions in 2 cases, 2 or 3 cases, height and stories. They talk about 3 or 5 stories on Main Broadway and moving from 1 story to 2 story. I asked the question, how can we go from 3 stories to 12 stories? In case you want to see what 10 stories looks like, this is what 10 stories looks like from one of the buildings. This is taken from Cottage Place. Currently, it's 9 stories, and you can see what happened to the river view. You can imagine what's going to happen if this is approved. I took a look at the zoning codes over the last 60 years. I'm told that we've had zoning for 60 years. Virtually all zoning is 3 stories high by right. Franklin Tower is in a zone that is 6 stories high. This proposal asks for 10 stories. I asked the question, why? I thought the answer was that this was tied to a proposal for a hotel and garage, where a garage would be put north of Village Hall. I've been assured, and Joan indicated, and I believe her, that there is no connection between this proposal and the SAO. I'm very happy to hear that, because what that means is there should be no pressure to move quickly. I've been talking about the east side, but I'd like to now talk about the west side. The height is currently 45 feet by right. This proposal will go to 70 feet. I asked the question, why? Out of all of the research that I've done, I don't come up with any answer for changing the existing zoning, other than the comprehensive plan says it. I don't think it does. The SAO, by the way, there's a misconception, and I want to take exception to this. Apparently, people feel that the SAO is an overlay zone. The document you sent out clearly indicates, quote, SAO zoning replaces the existing zoning. I can read, SAO zoning replaces the existing zoning. So it just boggles my mind. The viewpoints currently are shown in red. If you go to those sites, you can't see the red buildings on the left side that will be impacted. Perhaps people at the comprehensive plan work sessions weren't aware of what they were getting themselves into. They certainly did not think that 3 stories was going to become 10 or 12 stories. I'm proposing that the view sites should be where the blue marks are, because that's where the impact will be. The SAO scoring factors are, I hope, a work in progress. When you detail all of the spreadsheet, you find that the view shed accounts for 1.7% of the total, which means that if you score 0 on height, you lose 1.7%. But the developers can buy 20%, which effectively means.
I'm just saying, 5 minutes is up, but finish your thought.
Finish my thoughts.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I'll speed up. Bonus points, it's the
Well,
same thing I
you got
just
a lot of
made.
cards there, Del.
Participation,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah,
about.
they need to
Summary,
respond.
that's summary.
They should.
These are the suggested actions, and the one thing I would like you to remember, 55 feet is the top of the cupola.
Yeah. Yes, but there's some clarifications.
Okay,
Thank you, Dolph.
thank you.
I think you brought up a lot of points, and there is a need. I think there's a need to clarify a couple of the items that, and the assertions that were made. So if Joan and George could just briefly make comments on a couple of things. We don't want to turn this into a back and forth, continue back and forth.
I just want to clarify.
Joan, take a microphone, please.
I just want to clarify some misinformation here. Yes, yes. So there is a view shed that looks down Main Street. None of this would be able to be built. So if you're looking at this, I would say you have to take the entire middle section out of this building. There would not be allowed to be a building of any height extending over this roof line. So this is a piece of misinformation that I would just like to clear up. This Main Street would have to, Village Hall is here, and also, as it's written now, if you have a lot that's big enough to be allowed to do 10 stories, you have to have a 40-foot setback on either side, on all four sides. So you have a 40-foot setback, and then you have a 10-story, and if you're in the view shed, you can't have that either. So it's not like we were trying to get something by. We're trying to make it so that this whole piece is empty. We want to look down Main Street. That's why the view shed is down Main Street. There is not allowed to be something blocking that view from Main Street. So I just hope that's clear. This is not clear.
Wait till you turn to it. Hold on. Just hold on.
I'm sorry, afterwards,
Go ahead.
And just about the overlay. So it does get mapped on the project after it gets an SAO designation. So after it goes through all of the 4 ways that it could fail, and after, at the end of the process, it gets SAO designation, and then, yes, you are allowed to use the zoning of the overlay to apply to that project. So it does, in fact, replace the zoning at the end of the process. And if it fails, it doesn't, right? It doesn't replace the zoning.
Karen, speak right up to your mic.
I do want to point out that exactly in that sentence that you pointed out to us where it says SAO zoning replaces the existing zoning, but that sentence begins, once a parcel receives an SAO designation. So once it's gone through the process of saying, okay, this is something that we're going to consider SAO, then it replaces the existing. It does not replace existing until it's been designated as a project that is worthy of SAO designation.
Next person, David.
Can I just make one, to defuse everything? All I'm asking for is put it in writing so that everybody can understand what we have.
Okay.
And then I'm happy.
That's what we're
So we're here, and
That's why we're here.
it will be in writing. So.
It is in writing.
Okay.
Next.
There.
Hi, I'm Carol Griffiths. I live at 251 Martling Avenue, so I'm talking as a longtime resident, but also as a professor of biology who has taught courses and developed courses in sustainability and conservation, so that is one of my main concerns. I'm really glad that the board, first of all, I want to applaud all the work that was done. There are some wonderful SAO objectives that have been detailed, and I agree with all the objectives. I am a little bit concerned about some of the details, and I will bring that up. I'm not going to talk much about height. I also don't think that the current heights in the SAO are good. I think that they conflict with neighborhood character and with view sheds. And Joan, you made it a little bit clearer about that. It's not clear when you read the SAO that the view shed from Main Street is going to be protected. That's,
It is in there, but if it's not clear, we'll try to.
it is not clear, because I read it 3 times, so, okay. And I'm glad that the Board of Trustees is looking at that, one of the concerns. Let me put my glasses on. Okay, so my second concern is the protection of natural resources and biodiversity, and that is part of the comprehensive plan, and 2 of the 21 goals of the comprehensive plan. But I think that this is not talked about enough in the SAO, there's nothing in there that really prioritizes protecting the ecosystem, the Hudson River ecosystem, and its biodiversity. I'd like to see that spelled out a little bit more, and I'd like to see that any kind of development, especially west of the tracks, really takes a really hard look at what it does to biodiversity of the river. The river is beautiful, and anything we do now on the river is going to affect it forever. And we want to protect it, and we want to keep it open and keep it developed for things that are really useful to the people who live in the village, like maybe a little nature center, using it for education, things like that. I'd like to see less residential development and more accessibility to the people who live in the village here. And again, protection for the biodiversity and the ecosystem. My third concern is about affordable housing. I know that is a really strong point in the comprehensive plan, and I'm glad that the Board of Trustees is looking at tightening up the bonus points, because one of my concerns was that a developer could do everything except for inclusion of a lot of affordable housing, and then use bonus points to allow that developer to have little or no affordable housing along the river. So those are my concerns.
I just want to clarify one thing. Question actually poses a question to our attorney. I believe no matter what, the affordable housing requirements of our code would apply, and if not, we would probably make that clear if it's not clear already. That
Okay.
And there's higher levels that are noted in the SAO, but
Yeah,
there's
right.
also the baseline affordable housing requirements which apply across the village on any development. So I believe they would still apply.
Yeah, cross-references the requirement, so the minimum you have to do, the 10%,
Right,
but
so
you get more points if you do 30%.
Okay.
Would be-
Okay, minimum 10%. It'd be nicer if it a little bit more. 30% would be nice minimum, especially on the river, because that developments along the river now are probably not affordable to about 95% of the people who live in this village, including me. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
And also, I just want, George, if you can also comment on the way in which the scorecard works in terms of failing and what, because I don't think that was exactly clear.
So one of the points, how the mechanics of the scorecard works is that you have the 8 criteria, and there are components in the criteria. And if you fail one of the components, you fail that entire criteria. So if you get a 0, it zeroes out that entire category, criteria. So it makes it very hard to get a passing score if you fail any one thing. Now, one of the things that have been already talked about, and it's something that's up for discussion, is that instead of just failing the single criteria, getting a 0 on 1/8 of it, is just zeroing out the whole thing. And that is something that I've heard said, and it's something that I know the Board of Trustees is considering, making that change. And so if you fail affordable housing, for instance, that's it, the project fails. And that's a change that could be made. It's just whether you want to go that route.
And right now, the way you had set up, if you fail the view shed, you would fail the entire category of
For neighborhood criteria.
neighborhood criteria. So
Right.
the 1.7% that it appears to be, if you were to fail it as the example you gave, it would turn into 12.5%, correct?
Yeah, 12.5% 0,
Right.
yes.
So it is important to understand that there are sort of backstops, and they can also be strengthened. But even as it exists now, if we don't make any changes, a failure on the view sheds would turn into a failure on the entire category. So
That is correct,
So you get
yes.
a 0. Next person? David?
I have a couple of prepared.
Okay.
Thank you.
Try and stay to 5 minutes. I know it's not easy.
David Barnett, 104 Main Street. Joan, I'm sorry, I'm I'm just a bit still confused about the view shed, the 140-foot.
Speak to the mic, please.
I'm still a little confused before I speak what I wrote down. When you're saying it has 40-foot setbacks all around.
I'll try to explain it again.
Thank you.
So on that particular example,
Joan, the microphone. You gotta put your right up to it. Yes.
on that particular example,
Right.
so there are only a couple sites which would be allowed to have 10 stories at all, because you need to have a site that can have a 40-foot setback. So a lot of the sites in the whole station area zoning are not big enough to accommodate the sort of volume that you need to have.
Right.
So on that particular site, which is one of the biggest sites, you would have to have a 40-foot setback, first of all, from every side in order to allow 10 stories.
Can you put
But hold
that-
on,
go ahead.
there's more.
Yeah.
And because of that particular view shed that is from Main Street, you cannot look down Main Street and see any piece of that building. That's what the view sheds are all about. So it's to protect that view as if you're standing on Main Street or you're standing on Broadway in Maine, if you look down, you are not allowed to see a building over your house.
Okay.
So if you're proposing 10 stories there, and I can see it from Main Street, from Broadway in Maine, not allowed.
Joan, can I put that up a sec? Can I put that up a second? Because then there's no room to build anything. I mean,
Well, that's not
That's
our
exactly
problem.
right.
That's not our point.
well, forget it. I'm going to go home.
That's precisely the point, is that if that parcel,
So
which
it's
is,
the viewpoint is more important than the right to build 10 stories. End.
So, I mean, I'm really happy, but I'm really confused. Basically, that's the spot where 140-foot overlay zoning is being talked about.
Not allowed.
So why even talk
I didn't
about
bring
it?
it up. I didn't bring it up.
I mean, once you move to the left and you move to the right and you move north and west, there's not enough room.
A developer would have to show and document by photo simulation, and it would be authorized as being true, that if you stood at these view shed points and you looked down toward the river, that I wouldn't see that building. And they would have to prove that.
and they would have to also, what Joan says, from any parcel, they would have to be 40 feet from the left, 40 feet from the right, 40 feet from the west. I should have said east, west, north, and south. If
Right.
it's a square parcel, but
Right.
So you'd have to be right. So what Joan is saying is that the likelihood of a building being approved, number one, it'd be impossible in that spot, because if you look down Main Street, and actually if you look at as you go down Main Street, you're getting lower. So you're up high on Main Street, so anything would poke up above it, you would see it more from above.
There's an advantage truly of having the view sheds higher up on Main or from Broadway, because your angle of viewing them is steeper, so you can see more. If you're in front of your house and you're looking out, you could have a building that's taller than your house and I still couldn't see it.
Because your house is in the way.
But if you elevate the viewpoint, the place from where you view higher, you can see more. So that slope has to go down. It's to your advantage.
Do you want? Okay. Well, I have a prepared statement I'll make, but
You can if you
Don't-
don't want to speak it, you can submit it. It's your choice.
no, I work too hard. Okay.
But keep it to 5 minutes, please. We won't count the first
No, it's right
couple
there.
minute questions.
It'll take a minute.
Okay.
When we moved here 10 years ago from Hastings, it was because Tarrytown was a charming, diverse, bustling town. Everyone I've met over the years has agreed that, yes, Tarrytown is a cool place to live and a wonderful place to visit. It was voted one of the most beautiful towns in the country by Forbes magazine. Not so much anymore. I've been hearing from community and friends that Tarrytown is getting too congested and oversaturated. I believe that Tarrytown is at a tipping point, and if we're not careful, it can turn into just another generic city. It's about to lose its unique quality, and once it's gone forever. I'm all for developing the riverfront and the east and west side of the train station. I believe the Hudson River, with its dramatic views of the Palisades, is a tremendous asset for Tarrytown. Thanks to the hard work of some members on this board, in collaboration with the village, over a 4 to 5 year period for developing a comprehensive plan for this area. It's a thoughtful, carefully researched document outlining a future vision for this community. With that in mind, I don't understand the rush for this overlay, which seems at odds with the comprehensive plan. What's shocking to me is that it could take less time for this town to approve new zoning for 10-story buildings than it took me to get approval for adding a few shutters to the front of my house.
That's why you wanted to read it.
I'm going to quit now.
Go out on a high note.
I'll be here all week.
Go out on a high note.
Well, okay. If passed, it's possible that most people in my neighborhood and visitors to our beautiful village walking down Main Street will not be greeted with dramatic views of the Hudson River and the Palisades, the very thing that contributes to the charm of our village, but instead with a view that might be replaced by the back of a parking garage or some other structure 140 feet tall that's completely out of the character with the rest of the village. Unlike our neighbors to the south, Irvington and Dobbs Ferry have managed to develop their river frontage without jeopardizing the integrity of their communities. I fail to understand how any of this projects the interest of Tarrytown or is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Let's see. Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? I'm sure there is.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Love. I own Coffee Labs in Tarrytown. I also live at 88 Main Street on Tarrytown. Listen, change is inevitable. There's going to be development. It's just what happens. We're seeing it in the river towns. Dobbs Ferry is actually developing along the riverfront, which it is what it is. Tarrytown's going to do something over there. The overlay, the comprehensive plan, something's gonna get done. We just need to figure out what is gonna be the best for our village. Now, I hear in a lot of this conversation from the board and from over here, if. Well, there's nothing truly definitive. And what I don't hear is anyone speaking about traffic pattern. So we have Sleepy Hollow going on. Everyone wants this development, they want shopping, they want a hotel, they want a new marina. Great, that's all fine. I'm a business owner, I'm all about making money. But you're also gonna take away from the businesses on Main Street by developing more retail down there. But even more so, how do people get around? You're not widening Main Street. You're gonna take parking to do that? You can't widen Broadway. Where are these people gonna go? Retail standards, hospitality standards is 2.5 employees per guest at a hotel. So now you have that to deal with, industry standards, plus guests, plus the daily commuters and weekends. Where are they gonna go? Open space is a perfect idea. There's not enough of it. Why take away? There's gonna be building, I'm all for it, whatever, it's gonna happen. Do it responsibly, that's gonna be the best for the residents, new coming residents, people looking to move up here, people just coming to visit. We have a great thing. We're noticed all the time for the character and uniqueness of our village. When you guys talk about the overlay and the comprehensive plan, think about it. You guys live here. XYZ architecture, or XWXY, I always get that wrong, and I'm very familiar with them. They do amazing work, they do. I'll vouch for them on that. But it needs to be something for the village, not to benefit the developers. And also, what is gonna be the tax revenue? Because that's what you guys are gonna look at it. How much more is that gonna generate for the town than actually developing more of what we already have? With that, decisions in your guys' court with the help, but there's a lot of ifs and If we're fifth, we'd all be drunk discussing this. So there's a lot of if. Guys, have a good night. That's really all I have to say.
I just want to add that.
Hold on.
Traffic considerations will not disappear under this at all. I mean, everything we do, traffic and parking, becomes part of the review process, and it's on top of our minds all the time. Anything that's under consideration, we don't determine the specifics of what gets proposed to us, but every project is reviewed, and one of the considerations is always traffic. There's no question. Traffic and parking, it's the three biggest issues are traffic, traffic, and traffic. So
That's exactly what I was going to say, Mr. Love. We talk about this all the time. Traffic is a major concern. I've lived in this town for 56 years. I've seen the GM plant, so I've seen the traffic up and down Franklin. Believe me, I know. Okay, I've seen it when it was just that, and the way it is today. Believe me, we are seriously considering the traffic in this town.
And don't forget, you have the bridge opening.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Right. No,
Yeah.
and that level of review doesn't go away. There still has to be environmental review of whatever
Right.
project comes before.
Yeah.
And the impacts are part of the SAO process as well.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's not something that's
No,
there.
it's a true.
But also, there's a lot of ifs right now because we want to have ifs. That's why we're having this, to really start to really think about all these different permutations and possibilities. So you're right that there are a lot of ifs. It won't remain that way, but it's appropriate right now. We want to hear about all the concerns.
Good evening. I'm Gary Friedland. I have some concerns. I hope Joan is able to alleviate my concerns the way she's addressed some of the others. I'm a scholar in residence at NYU Stern School of Business. I teach courses in commercial real estate transactions, zoning, and development. So I take great interest and follow. I've attended many of the work sessions where George has given terrific explanations of how the process would work. I have some NIMBY concerns. I live at Hudson Harbor. But before I get into the NIMBY concerns, I wanted to pick up on some of the concerns that Mr. Love just expressed, particularly as far as traffic. I also have some concerns about suggestions as far as maybe alleviating concerns about the height restrictions in the 10 stories, as well as some concerns about the scorecard. But starting, and I'm going to end up reading some of this because I know my time is limited. But as far as the H Bridge, we all know the H Bridge is antiquated and not designed to handle the existing traffic conditions. It was cited in a 2017 New York State Controller's Report as one of the most structurally deficient bridges in New York State. Ironically, in 2013, the village sued Sleepy Hollow due to the traffic likely to be generated by the development of the GM plant, now the Edge. Settled, and the Edge developers required to fund a minimum amount towards the traffic improvements in Tarrytown, much of which has not been installed. And unfortunately, the traffic and other impacts of the Edge will be felt much sooner than anyone anticipated. We all know that 1,177 units are scheduled to be built there. But what we didn't expect is that Toll Brothers, which has started the first phase, is going to build 336 of their 496 units as rental units. In addition, recently it was announced that Hines, a major developer of the same size as Toll, has acquired the rights to build 250 rental units. So there you have 600 families moving in. As rental units, it will take roughly 18 to 24 months to build. They're going to be absorbed much more rapidly than for-sale condo units. And I don't think it's something that the village is anywhere near being ready to handle. In addition to that, there are 69 units at 29 Depot Plaza next to the train station, which is in process. There's 100 units at the YMCA, some of which already exist, that was recently acquired by a major developer. There are 225 proposed units at the CVS, which was an application that's been withdrawn, but it wouldn't be surprising if that resurfaces. And at Hudson Harbor, the developer is proposing to build at least 66 more units, and even more units than that, for perhaps if in fact Hudson Harbor is included in the SAO.
And as Mr. Love pointed out, the increased tourism is going to generate even more traffic, and that's without even considering all the other impacts that could be generated by the SAO projects. If the H Bridge is not designed to accommodate emergency evacuation procedures, now, I don't know when it will be. For example, you have weather events such as sea level rise, Hudson River level rise, which can cause conditions which may call for evacuation. The H Bridge has difficulty handling traffic when there's a Yankee game or there's rush hour. On a night like tonight, if there were a fire and the fire trucks had to go across the H Bridge and icy conditions skid and block the H Bridge, how do you evacuate? And I think these are issues that haven't been studied. And to point out that these are items that will be in an EIS down the road, I think is a very narrow perspective. Instead, who is going to be taking the global view? What are the cumulative impacts that will be caused by the SAO? And address that before you embark upon a procedure where you start inviting applications to be filed. Has the village studied necessary infrastructure improvements? Have you considered the realignment of the roadways, alternate access to the H Bridge? Might this be funded by the developers who have projects in the SAO? Other municipalities along the river have retained the Nature Conservancy, the River Keeper, and Cornell's Climate Adaptive Design Studio to recommend resiliency measures to preserve areas near the waterfront. Has Tarrytown pursued these resources? As far as a NIMBY issue, if you could bear with me for a second, I question the justification for expanding development opportunities in the areas most vulnerable to climate change and river level rise, as well as the most treasured views in the village. Why include the undeveloped parcels at Hudson Harbor in the SAO district? Unlike most of the other parcels in the district, Hudson Harbor is not underutilized, it's not burdened by inappropriate zoning. 220 of the 250 units that were approved have been built. We're now at the tail end of the project, and the board or someone in their infinite wisdom decided that a more massive development should be permitted there. What's already permitted is very generous, and under the new zoning, they would be able to build to 60 feet. I think that's clear. Well, 70 feet with obstructions, but I'm being fair and saying 60. So 60 to 70 feet, whereas the current zoning is clearly provides for 45 feet. And on numerous occasions, the developers exceeded that. I won't pursue that. But the point is that why would you reward a developer at the tail end of a project with a zoning bonus to allow more massive development in an area where you're trying to stimulate alternative uses, promote view sheds, open space corridors? Instead, I could go on. And there's no density, and the plan has intense density controls, floor area controls, et cetera, yet this feel-good, flexible zoning doesn't impose those controls, and you're asking us to rely upon the board to prevent it. And what you're inviting, because of this, and this relates to the scorecard, is you're inviting the opportunity for developers to sue the town or the village because you don't have stringent conditions. Now, I know that this scorecard hasn't been used anywhere in New York State other than perhaps parts of the city. And I don't know whether you've checked with council as to what the nature of legal challenges to those zoning rules have been. What's been the outcome? Have they controlled development? I've exceeded my 5 minutes, I know it. I have points on the scorecard. But my last point is on the 10 feet, on the 10 stories. I would suggest that the village simply identify those locations that are suitable for 10 stories, eliminate the issue, eliminate the uncertainty, and
time, or if you want to submit your comments by email, electronically, give us a Word copy, we'd be happy to accept that too. Thank you.
My name is Barbara Goodman Barnett. I live at 104 Main Street in Tarrytown. I edited my talk a little bit based on some of the feedback I got because I didn't want to be redundant. anyway, but the current zoning for the train station area in Tarrytown is for 3 stories. It seems excessive to have this overlay to triple the allowance to 10 stories. As a point of reference, Lookout North and Lookout South, located in Hudson Harbor, is 4 stories. Can you imagine buildings more than double their height being put up around the train station area? Why is it necessary, and why is the public, who was so closely involved at one time, not aware that these overlay plans could be voted on as early as January 2020? This sounds to me like Tarrytown disconnected. I don't understand why the zoning cannot stay the way it is, and then, if necessary, the contractor can go to the zoning board for a variance. That way, our village would have more control over projects and insurance that buildings cannot take advantage of our town by overextending projects for their own profits. If developers know we are zoned for 10 stories, then they'll build 10 stories. They're not interested in sustaining the beauty and character of our village, but the Board of Trustees should be.
Oh, okay, we have 2 people, but.
I'm sorry. My name's Alan Reichman. I'm down at Hudson Harbor, and Gary stole a lot of my thunder, so I'll be I'll be very brief. Yes, why would you reward developers who have known to have development abuses in Hudson Harbor already, and then give him an opportunity to do it again? It just doesn't make any sense. So that west parcel really should not adhere to, if anything, you should get him to lower it to compensate for what he did on the 2 buildings on the water in south and north. I mean, so we all know that. That was really, I wanted to echo that point, because the traffic down there is already getting to be pretty tough. And I know everyone talks about they want retail. Believe me, more people down there don't want retail because of the traffic. We're happy to walk into the village and give our business to the Main Street guys. We love that.
I just want to say, that's exactly why.
Okay?
Well, when the planning, I just want to tell you that when the planning of Hudson Harbor went on, we reduced enormously the amount of retail and commercial that had been originally proposed for precisely that reason. So there's not some rush to have more retail and commercial in any significant
amount. At best,
amount
we could
on
use
the
a post
waterfront.
office down there, but that's it.
Yeah, right.
We all want to go to Coffee Labs for our coffee. Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing? My name is Craig Singer. My wife Judy and I live in Hudson Harbor. As one of the original residents, we now have about 400 neighbors. We live on the northeast side of Hudson Harbor, directly across from the lodge and the Tappan Zee Bridge parking lot, and looking distance at the Cooney Building. And I want to thank Mr. Beal for providing this, because we live right here, and this is what's being proposed. Hudson Harbor is a lovely addition to Tarrytown. It is relatively dense, which, pursuant to its master plan, there are only 2 other earlier agreed upon remaining changes to come, both on the north side. But your proposed overlay permits other things to happen. My wife and I both raised our families in North and Westchester and have been pleased with our choice of Tarrytown to relocate. I am experienced in multiple living environments, and I must say that Tarrytown has a special environment. I'm a non-practicing attorney who's been in the real estate business for my entire professional life. I'm now a senior member of the Richmond Group of Companies, GSE lending platform, which I was instrumental involved in creating. Richmond is one of the largest multifamily housing companies in the nation, is a developer, manager, general contractor, and financial resources for all types of housing, from affordable to workforce to luxury. I'm also on the Tarrytown Affordable Task Force, and some of you on the board are on that task force too, along with other talented members of the community. I've worked closely with government my entire career. I read about the current proposal of a rezoning of the station area. Informed by my background, my first and continuing reactions have been that inclusion of Hudson Harbor, a largely complete and agreed upon and sold residential development that works, must be inadvertent. I'd like to direct my conversations to my reactions with the following questions for this board and the community to consider. Since Hudson Harbor's approved master plan is largely completed and the units sold to a large number of people relying on the plan, what was the thinking to include Hudson Harbor in the proposed rezoning? 2, what about Hudson Harbor is contemplated to be improved by including it in the rezoning? 3, how would the rezoning benefit the village, especially since so many of the Hudson Harbor residents oppose it? And lastly, who benefits from the proposed change and why? In sum, my basic question is what is broken to fix or improve upon here, and why is Hudson Harbor being considered to be included in the proposed zoning? As you probably have reasoned by now, I oppose the proposed change, and thus I respectfully request that whatever is decided about the rezoning, Hudson Harbor is excluded. I thank you very much and would be delighted to hear your responses and answer any questions.
Thank you. I would actually wanted to ask if Kathy or has a comment on the inclusion of Hudson Harbor in the, or Joan, in how Hudson Harbor area, I mean, it's not Hudson Harbor itself, since I believe part of the answer is you can't say Hudson Harbor can't be part of this, but I believe there's zoning issues that come into play, but I would leave it up to the attorney.
I think that's a suitable answer, Mr. Mayor. I think that's a suitable anscer and a very strong
Perhaps.
reason to exclude Hudson Harbor.
I don't know if it's that simple, which is why, I don't know.
I mean, we have to, no, it isn't.
Right, you're not prepared to answer, I mean.
Sir.
Yeah, I have to think about the answer to the question, and I'd rather give legal advice in executive
You know,
session
this
to the
is not a
board.
legal question. It's a business question. I've been in the business my entire career. I've worked with major developers who are some of them my best friends. There is no reason that I can think of at this stage of that development to include Hudson Harbor if you think about it. I don't want to be looking at a 70-foot building across the street from me or a hotel where the lodge now is. That's not what I bought. It's not Hudson Harbor. It's not what you should permit. I thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Fish. I also live in Hudson Harbor. My predecessors basically stole my thunder, said everything I was about to say, but I do want to put a little different spin on it. First of all, I agree that there was an EIS done back when Hudson Harbor was approved. It considered traffic impacts without the knowledge of the edge coming in and adding 1,100 units. And I see no reason to sort of change, to put this overlay over Hudson Harbor at all. But to me, it goes beyond Hudson Harbor. Really, anything west of the H Bridge, of the railroad tracks, is going to cause huge problems. We are in 10 years, we're going to have 5 times the number of units residing west of the railroad right-of-way than we have today. And as it is now, on a sunny day in the spring, or as Gary said, after a Yankee game, or even, on a rush hour train, you have to wait to get out. And there's really 2 means of egress. There's going past the edge up through Sleepy Hollow, or going over the H Bridge. So before we add any uses west of the railroad right-of-way that's going to increase traffic at all, I think we need to figure out these infrastructure issues, because they're really, really serious.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and the Board of Trustees. My name is Gary Connolly, and I'm the president of the Hudson Harbor Lighthouse Condominium Homeowners Association, and I'm here with other residents of the Lighthouse community. Our board and our residents have had the opportunity to view the schematics of the plans of the final phase of Hudson Harbor, which includes the Cooney Building and the Gatehouse. These plans are independent of the SAO zoning proposal in that the plans do not require any changes to the current zoning law. Moreover, the plans are keeping with the overall look, use, feel, and beauty of our community. It is our understanding that Hudson Harbor will be submitting these plans to the Village Planning Board shortly. We are here to express our desire for the village to approve the final phase of Hudson Harbor on an expedited basis. It is important to the residents in our building that construction on the final phase begin as soon as possible. While everyone in the village is negatively affected by the unsightly vacant building and vacant lots that currently occupy these sites, the residents of our building are hardest hit as they occupy the space adjacent to those properties. The village has done an excellent job ensuring that Hudson Harbor development was constructed in a manner that is keeping with the historic beauty and community feel of our village. And our residents believe that the final approval of this final phase will cap off an already beautiful waterfront development. We also feel that the final phase of Hudson Harbor is consistent with the overall objectives of Tarrytown's comprehensive plan, including the village's desire to maximize the potential of the waterfront and to develop a cohesive vision for the future of the station area and the waterfront. So again, we are here to voice our support of the final phase of Hudson Harbor and hope that the village acts expeditiously in its approval process. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kurt Beal, I'm a resident of 108 Main, that guy's son. So I'm a physician, I'm a doctor of integrative medicine, got a master's degree in public health with a focus on urban green space as a public health promotion tool. I did my postdoc in psychological and physiological benefits of urban green space, and I've written, published, lectured nationally and internationally on these topics. I know a few things about the benefits of good views of nature. And so I just wanted to offer a point of consideration for the board, and I want to thank you all for all the good work that you're doing on these topics. It's good to see this, all these things considered. Just want to point out that when we're talking about these viewpoints, that these aren't just aesthetic amenities. These aren't just niceties that we have here in Tarrytown. These are public health resources. Every time somebody's looking at the river, they're benefiting their physical well-being. Their blood pressure is going down. Cortisol, the stress hormone, is being reduced. Oxytocin, the hormone that's built in when people are in community, is engendered and raised. People appreciate these things, that it is a value to them on a holistic level to have all these views. And so it's just something that I want to point out to consider as we're looking at what are we constructing in this town that may be reducing that opportunity. That's not just, I understand there's trade-offs, right? There's always development, tax revenues is a good thing, but it's not just a 1.7% on the scorecard of, this is a nice view, we can take or leave. It's a much broader thing than that, and I just wanted to point that out for consideration. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sadie McEwen. I live at 3 Archer Place. I've been in Tarrytown since 1994. I'm currently on the Comprehensive Plan Management Committee. So I wanted to get up and give a shout out to the village for the comprehensive plan process and for not letting that document sit on the shelf. The village took very seriously the time and energy invested on behalf of the residents that live here and everybody that participated and said, we want this to be a living document, and we're going to create volunteer committees to work hard at the issues that were identified in that plan. So we met tonight before this meeting. I think this is our 5th or 6th meeting so far this year, and I just want to read the list of things that we're working on, give everyone comfort that the village is taking their concerns seriously. So the first thing was this, the station area zone. Parking management is another. Housing affordability, and I'm the chair of that committee. and have an active group of volunteers who are experts and professionals in real estate and housing, particularly affordable housing. We're looking at volunteerism and how people that want to volunteer can get involved in the committee. Transportation, local transit, and traffic. Placemaking, looking at wayfinding and complete streets. Historic Tarrytown, honoring the history of the community. Resiliency and energy, concerned about the environment and the fact that we really are living on the water. Trails and open spaces, understanding the importance of that to our village's history and our future. And then it's a living list, so it will continue to grow and develop. We have participation from the trustees, and we welcome anyone in the village that wants to come out and volunteer. You know, I got recruited because I have an expertise in housing, and I work really hard every day at my job. It's really fulfilling for me to be able to take my professional expertise and share it in a community that is so open and willing to engage and embrace with its members on how to make this a better place for all of us. This station area zone is good for the village, and it's good for this area of the village because it's right at the hub of transit, and transit-oriented development is happening everywhere. And you see it up and down the river when you take the train, and if you go to New Rochelle or if you go to some of the other large cities. And I'm pretty certain that Yonkers, for instance, didn't go through the kind of plan that this village is undertaking. And that's because everybody here really cares. And disparate opinions are important because they inform collaborative decisions. So I applaud the village for its efforts to keep the comprehensive plan going and to extend it out into the community. I'm getting a lot out of the feedback, and I'm happy to listen and hear from the residents, and I welcome additional comments tonight, but also further engagement from the community.
Harley Dembert, and I'm a resident of 85 Main Street, and I do appreciate this forum, and I feel like at this point I just would like to more speak from the heart. I moved here in 1995 and wasn't sure what to expect here, but I feel like it's been Shangri-La. I mean, it's really an incredible community. I feel like when I walk down by the river, it's as if I'm in some New England town. It could be up in Maine, Rhode Island, or whatever. But it's just incredible to have that kind of variety that's here. And some of the things that I'm concerned about that was mentioned is that we should forget just the view corridors on that one might see from Broadway and Main, but how about all of Main Street, or how about everywhere else that we walk down into this area? And I understand the necessity for revenue and things like that, but there's a lot happening. And one of the things I actually did to protect Tarrytown was I started, as per the mayor, I started an advisory committee to save the Tarrytown lakes, and we have tremendous beauty all over. But to bring it particularly to the area that we're talking about, that I'm concerned about, is that when I walk down there, there's just an incredible feeling of solitude and quiet, and I'm concerned that all of that could just easily change, and we have two buildings that were built back in the 1970s as reminders of what happens when development runs amok. And so we're really at a precipice right now to look at these things. And the way that I look at it is not just what's going to happen in the next couple of years. In fact, I even discussed with my wife, with it getting so built up here, the possibility of us moving north to experience what Tarrytown was. But I'm looking ahead to 40 years from now with my daughter, who's right there, who would like to come and talk about not just what Tarrytown's going to be like in 2000 and 2025, but when she's my age, which is going to be in 2060. So she's still young enough where I don't have to, ask how old she is, but I'd like her to come up and say a few words.
I'm Lydia Dembert, also a resident of 85 Main Street, and I just wanted to speak as a member of the younger generation of this town that I've grown up here my whole life, and I've looked at this view from every school that I've been a part of and a member of, and I want to speak on what Mr. Buell was saying with the physical well-being of looking at that view. I really think it's something that shaped me and my peers, and I just can't imagine raising my kids in a town that doesn't have that sort of charm and beauty to it. So I'd like to ask you to definitely consider that and consider the future of this town and who's planning on living in it later on. And another thing I have a question on is Hudson Harbor. Where we live in 85 Main Street, that was something that was initially proposed, if I believe, to be 4 stories, and it ended up being closer to 5, and it did block the view shed from that residency. So if you think about how the proposed plan wants to allow stories that are higher than that, that would be east of the Tarrytown train station. I think that that would definitely impede views. So just that's something I want you to consider. Thank you.
I just want to make one comment about the waterfront, is that areas that are parkland are not up for development. So you do need to keep that in mind. Not that it alleviates all of the concerns by any stretch, but it is important to remember that where we have parks, they're not going to be built on. So that I just want to get that on the table because it's important. Because I don't want the notion that you're going to see this wall of buildings that are going to fill an entire waterfront. It's not possible. So that's just the one thing.
Can I ask one question though?
Sure.
Isn't part of the proposed plan?
Come up to the mic because.
Isn't part of the proposed plan in front of the Portuguese Club, which would be?
It's in the zone, but
There's
no
plan.
There's no plan, right? There's no plan, and just point out, that parcel is owned by the village. So it's and again, as Joan explained, the views from Main Street would prevent anything of any height above the houses at the bottom of Main Street from going up because it would in fact block the views down Main Street. Right. And the greatest point at which you would see that view is from the top of Main Street, because as you go down Main Street, the angle increases, right, and the buildings get in the way. So, but it doesn't, of course, as it happened with Hudson Harbor. There are residents whose entire view, can't be protected because where you live, you can see the entire waterfront. So nothing could have been built there without having some impact on what you saw. But the parkland would not be built on. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Evan Norris, and I also live in Hudson Harbor. First of all, let me thank the good doctor here for explaining to all of us why we feel so good when we look at the water every day. Thank you. And now that there's a scientific reason behind it seems. Terrific. That's wonderful. A lot of people from Hudson Harbor have spoken already and given a lot of reasons why they feel that it's inappropriate for it to be included in the overlay zone. And I just wanted to add one quick point, and that is that when we all purchased at Hudson Harbor, it was under a offering plan. And in that offering plan, there was a development plan for Hudson Harbor, which had been approved by the village. And it was with that expectation that I would suggest most of us moved here. And for now, the village to kind of change the ground rules after we're in seems to me to be patently unfair. And I think that's something that should be considered when figuring out what should be included in the overlay zone. And for that reason, I think it's probably not unreasonable to request that the Hudson Harbor development not be included. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before the next, I'd like to just say something, which is kind of I'm not on the mic. Okay.
You got to be right up.
Yeah, I'm right on the mic. I actually moved here in Tarrytown in 1984, and there was no Hudson Harbor. And what's kind of interesting is that I don't even think Rivercliff was here at the time. But I also know that when Hudson Harbor was being developed, there was issues with Rivercliff about the view shed. And I think that this board and all the people that work on this board worked very hard to make sure that when Hudson Harbor was built, that all those considerations were taken in terms of viewshed. So this is not the first rodeo in terms of the village trying to look out for those things that makes Terrytown, especially the waterfront. So a lot of people weren't here before when the waterfront was just the concrete plant and a couple of other things. So what you're enjoying now is took a lot of great effort, a lot of planning to make sure that we got it right. And yeah, maybe we didn't get everything right, but you know, we work very hard to try to make things right. So this board is working for you, and we're trying to do the best effort that we can possibly can with the professionals around us. So we welcome your comments, and we'll be taking a lot of that information and sort of massaging what we already have. Thank you.
Anybody else who wishes to speak tonight? Wait, Howard?
Good evening, everybody. Howard Smith, 87 Main Street. I'll try not to take out on you like the entire pent-up frustration of my career as a public servant and being on the receiving end of these things. Like, this is my chance.
You know about cortisol, I think.
You know what they say about karma. Anyhow, that said, and I also have to confess, I'll put the elephant in the room, and when Rivercliff people come up, yes, we care about our view. I don't think we should have to apologize for that. It's why we're there. We paid extra for it. If our view is severely compromised, our places will be less, to say nothing about our enjoyment of it. So I don't think we should have to be made to feel like we're just NIMBY people if we express concerns about development in ways that could impact our what we enjoy so greatly from our own point of view. That said, and that I'll confess that was probably the bulk of my initial interest in this when I was hearing about some height stuff. But then I got looking into it a little bit more. I had some questions and concerns on a broader level, and the analogy that sort of came to mind. You excuse me of wandering back my days as a school superintendent, but it was sort of like where we are now reminds me of what would a situation would have been if we had, in the school district, had a comprehensive curriculum planning committee, for example, and we come up with this comprehensive plan, and then a committee had gone off and worked on the selection criteria, and then gone directly to the Board of Education to begin promoting that without circling back first to all the people that had participated in the comprehensive plan. So I think you've done a wonderful job with the comprehensive plan. It's an incredible document. It's very eloquent. It is very comprehensive. But when you look at the zoning overlay cold, it doesn't appear to be as reflective as it might be of what is really embraced by the comprehensive plan. And some of the specifics tend to be a little potentially alarming. They seem to lack some of the protections that people at least perceive currently exist for that area. And I can't resist, because the developer 2 weeks ago handed the opportunity to us, and I understand that it is not an actively being considered project, but I do think it stands as potentially Exhibit A of what a developer is inclined to do with feeling like the license that they're given by this type of an overlay. And I would argue that building a structure large enough to meet the specs of a major hotel chain is not necessarily creative. And rather than relying upon the character of the existing historic building stock in the community for inspiration, the architect claimed to be inspired by the new Tappan Zee Bridge, which he noted with more than a hint of patronizing condescension was not the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, I feel it's interesting that he made reference to the Brooklyn Bridge. I happen to have a big picture of it in my house, but apart from that, he was being dismissive of an iconic national historic landmark that has demonstrated the inherent capability of being adaptable to changing demands for more than 130 years without sacrificing its historic character. I submit that the riverfront zone should be thought of as our Brooklyn Bridge, linking the heart of the community to the river. It's not creative for a developer to exploit higher building allowances by simply constructing taller buildings. Rather, the creativity we should be looking for is the kind that generates innovative concepts for meeting today's needs while respecting the scale and historic character of our village. So let's commit to a process for ensuring that the new zoning proposal achieves that goal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Smith, would you like to join one of our committees? Take his name.
Anybody else like to speak tonight? We're going to continue the public hearing, so.
My name is Howard Jaffe. I'm a resident of Rivercliff. The one thing that I haven't heard after all of the effort that everybody's been expending, and I do appreciate your effort in coming up with this plan, is the impact on the village. Nobody's been discussing that. Now, there's some practical impacts. You're going to get additional income from a 10-story building, but what would that cost be? You might have to buy a new fire truck for $1.5 million to reach up 10 flights. You may have to redo your infrastructure in order to have water pressure for the fire system. There are new rules since the other 10-story buildings have been built. In fact, I think in Greenberg, every new private house has to have a sprinkler system. So with all these new rules and laws, I think that you really have to put the impact on the village. Will we have to go from a volunteer fire department to a paid fire department? That's going to eat up a lot of the money that you're going to get in additional tax. What about the police department? What about public services? And I think that in drawing the master plan, you really have to do a study of this before you come up with 10-story buildings. You know, and I haven't heard a word of that.
Well, we would be responding at the planning level and at the board level to whatever was proposed, and an evaluation would be of those impacts precisely. So any analysis would say, what is the net impact? So you're precisely correct that you would have to look at the net impact. To do it in the relative vacuum of no particular project being proposed, you can't really do. But if somebody proposed a project, they would have to spell out what would those impacts be. That's the whole idea behind it is say, we want to look at the net revenue impacts, not the gross revenue. Doesn't matter if it's going to, as you say, perhaps cost you have another fire company or 5 more policemen, whatever that might be. That goes into the evaluation of any proposal, but it would have to respond to the proposal. And the idea behind this is that you'd be pushing proposals towards things that would fulfill all your goals, which would include having positive revenue impacts on the other taxpayers in the village. That's one of our goals.
Shouldn't that go into your planning now?
It is, but it's not specific to it would have to be specific to a project before you could actually do that analysis. So your concerns are right on the mark, and it is something that that is part of the process of evaluating any project.
Well, I appreciate your accommodation here.
Thank you. No, the gentleman. Oh, someone's gonna. Come on up.
Good evening. I'm Jack Walsh. I have a house on Independence Street, an apartment on Hamilton Place. I'm a professional engineer and I'm a registered architect. And a former real estate development, but you can see I'm probably retired. There's probably some people here that were on, I've been living in Tarrytown for 45 years. So there's probably some people here that might have been on my Little League team, my dad's club. Okay, I only have 2 questions. One, this is the first time I heard Toll Brothers, the name. Are they the developers? Are they the prominent developers that are in this?
They're over in Sleepy Hollow.
Sleepy Hollow.
They're people from here.
Sleepy Hollow.
They're in Sleepy Hollow, and they did They developed homes up in Wilson Park.
Okay, a long time ago when the hearings for the Planning Commission, or whatever it's called, was held at the library, I asked for an environmental impact statement. Was one ever prepared, and who paid for it?
For what?
For what, I'm sorry?
Huh?
For Edge on Hudson, which property are you concerned about?
Well, I'm concerned about the whole thing we're talking about now.
Well, so you're asking if a environmental impact
Was an environmental impact statement
for which
prepared?
project?
Huh?
For this rezoning, no.
Yes.
Because it's not associated with the project yet.
There's none, has one been prepared or not?
No, because it's not associated with the project yet.
And the legislation requires you to still go through the secret process, so it's very different from
Okay.
other
Well, the secret-
applications where you do an EIS and then you create a master plan and you have, shovel in the ground projects. The developer still has to go through the environmental review under this proposed zone.
Who is going to pay for it?
The developer,
The developer is paying for the environmental
which is
impact statement.
how it always works, and then the village would have the
I've gone through this
opportunity.
before. The developer pays for the environmental impact statement.
And
he
pays for the
puts in it
village's
whatever he wants.
consultants.
He can tell you how much traffic, whatever the problems are. He can do all that. Why isn't Tarrytown, you people, paying for the environmental impact statement and maybe charging back to them? I mean, this is not right.
Because we don't have a project yet. There is no project. So
This question is broad.
I think he's taking it the edge still.
No, you're talking about the SAI.
Someone's gonna put their thumb on the scale if the developer actually pays
Right, so that's how it always happens, where the developer prepares the EIS initially, and then it becomes the document of the lead agency, whether it's the planning board or the village board.
You all see what's
And the
happening
village
here.
board and the planning board can hire its own consultants, that happens all the time, to review what the developer's consultants puts in, to make sure that it's supported.
The projects that have, such as Hudson Harbor, went through an EIS process that the developer paid for it, but we spent weeks, if
No, they
not
did
and
an EIS,
months,
but I don't know what they
reviewing
did.
it, questioning it, challenging it, having our experts look at it. Same thing happened in Sleepy Hollow. Now, in Sleepy Hollow, we had no real input, other than as a interested agency. But the developer did the environmental review. The developer in Hudson Harbor did the environmental review. They've done it in other projects as well. So the process that takes place is one in which the developer does it, but it doesn't mean they get to say what they want.
No.
Okay.
It's not, we have the same interest in making sure that the information in there is accurate and precise and
How do you do
responds
that,
to
may
all
I
of our
ask?
questions. They have to keep
How
on
do you
answering
make
questions.
sure that their environmental impact statement is correct?
Because
How do you
we
do that?
pay our own, we get from them funding for our own consultants to review what they are
Do
doing.
you have a consultant that you're paying to do their review?
No, there's no project now. So if there
How
were
many-
a project
may I ask,
proposed.
sir, and please forgive me, this is my last question. How many developers do you have that have already bid on this thing?
Zero. There's no project here. This is to perhaps put an overlay zoning on the area, and then if a developer had a piece of property that they thought they wanted to develop, they would then make a proposal to do that. At that
Have
point.
the Toll Brothers made any proposals to you?
No.
No.
No. No, it's okay, yeah.
Can I-
It's- yeah, there is no project in this. There was a preliminary presentation from a developer with the boat club, with the Tarrytown Boat Club, but that's not, it's not a proposal, it was a preliminary presentation. So it's not, there is no project at this point.
Okay.
All right, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick.
Hi, my name is Lauren Johnson. I too live at River Cliff. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I'll just ask one quick question. I think you're hearing it loud and clear from everyone here that we'd all have a better